Welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to this very special episode of Montreal by Night. I am your host for now, Ethan Jonah. With me in the studio, we have Takeshi Fukushima.
I'm in first place. My god, this is what it feels like.
We have our beloved storyteller, Tyson Fraleigh.
Fuck you.
Not really matching my energy, but that's okay. And in third place, as always, Brenten Edwards, where he belongs.
See, I was gonna say that Tyson is so salty because he's tied to a chair in the studio, but I might fly up there and free him after being put to bottom billing. It's not very nice.
It's true, listeners. We did tie him up. I wanted to be in charge.
In fairness, I like it. So
yeah, this is very much what Tyson is into.
This is the After Dark Montreal by Night episode where we just get real steamy.
After Dark is a very good talkback name for a vampire podcast.
I know, right?
That is really good.
Takeshi, take over. I've been ousted until I come up with something clever.
Well, damn. Okay, didn't know this was happening. Welcome back to a very special episode of Montreal by Night where we will not be playing any Vampire the Masquerade. Instead, we will be discussing everything that went on during the past season of Montreal by Night, getting deep into the questions that have been plaguing you, the audience, as well as us, the players, and possibly Tyson the storyteller. I don't know. I don't talk to Tyson.
It's a wall of silence between me and Takeshi ever since I got the restraining order.
Yeah, a wall of silence and like one or two walls of just drywall. Like just two doors over. I'll start us off by asking our beloved DM a couple questions. Tyson, this was the first podcast you've recorded and published. What were your feelings going into it and having to collect cast members?
That is a very thoughtful and genuine question that I wasn't expecting as the first question to come from our dear boy Ethan Jonah. I thought he was just going to shit talk me for the first one. As you have mentioned, this is the first podcast that I have developed and promoted myself. I was very lucky and very grateful to be able to work with the October and Fish gang so I could get a little bit of an insight into what all of it looks like. But essentially what I did for developing everything, as far as casting is concerned and like determining who I wanted for what, I tried to... Well, for one thing, before everything started, there was a list of RPGs that I knew I wanted to play and to be able to show people and to kind of essentially offer what might be a little bit of an alternative to what some of these games can look like. So people don't feel necessarily constrained by some other kind of dominant podcasts of the same genre. But also I just wanted to show people some lesser known RPGs because everyone's heard of Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of people have heard of Pathfinder and such. But people, for the most part, I don't really think have been exposed very much to things like Vampire the Masquerade or Tales from the Loop or Dune. I can't even remember the full name for Dune, but regardless, so I kind of set up just a spreadsheet and I sent it to a bunch of people that I knew were like essentially just some of the best role players I have had in my life, and I'm very honored to have the three of you with me here because of that. And essentially I just took everyone's answers and I tried to build groups that would be like balanced to a certain extent. People who I knew would be incredibly funny, people I knew who could really bring home the really heartfelt moments when they saw fit. Yeah, and also just making sure that people were actually interested in playing it and they were engaged, because by no means do I ever want to run a game that's gonna have like the players bored or feel like they're obligated to show up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Takeshi and I have played together before with you as the DM. What made you confident that the dynamic between the three of us would be solid?
Actually, that's a fair question. I've only interacted with Tyson. I was in Canada for like what 10 months, 11 months, and I never actually met Ethan and Takeshi the whole time I was there. So everything between the four of us as a whole has only been over the internet. I've only interacted with Tyson in person.
When were you in Montreal? What year?
I moved over to London in mid 2015, did my 2 years there, and thought I haven't had enough of traveling. Where else can I go? And I'd met a couple of girls that I became friends with in London, and they were from Montreal. And I'm like, sweet, I'm gonna go to Montreal, catch up with them. And then I was there from mid 2017 to like the start of May 2018.
So Tyson and I were in the same residence building at the beginning of our undergrad degrees, but then after that year, we weren't really in contact with each other for a while until would it have been 2018? Early 2018, I think. We had a class together and got back in touch and started hanging out again.
I guess if we're all just explaining how we met Tyson, Tyson and I, it's really interesting because initially we had met because I had gone to see a play that Tyson had co-written and ended up performing in. It was a small community theater production, but it was done by a bunch of friends that I had worked with before and that I had known, and Tyson was very funny in it. And it was a very good time, but I don't think, and we also coincidentally ended up in the same program at university, the creative writing program, but I don't think that we obviously we'd been friends, but I don't think we had really become like good friends until we had shared a Shakespeare class together. This is my read on the situation. Tyson, you can have a different interpretation.
Well, I definitely think that was probably the point where like we actually became like friends as opposed to like, oh yeah, you're a friend like based on proximity of other friends that I have. Yeah, because I suppose me, Takeshi, and two other of our classmates, we would all go to one of their abodes, and we'd all read the Shakespeare plays together in the dumbest voices ever.
Yeah, it was a very good time.
So we've got then two uni friends and some rando traveler that Tyson met in a gaming shop. To circle back to Ethan's question, what made you think that we would all gel well together and be able to have not just like a functioning game, but also we'd be able to bounce off each other and actually have that sort of like organic, natural relationship playing the game?
Well, there's a few different reasons. The first reason why I chose Ethan and Takeshi for this game is because I knew that they knew each other. Like we've all played in games together for the three of us. As far as pulling Brenten into the loop, I was actually a little bit concerned at first for pulling Brenten in, only because I knew I was going to have two people with way more natural charisma than I do, and could easily take over.
I mean, I'm here too, but that's fine.
But yeah, like I knew that. I suppose like my like choices for it is that with every game, like I kind of want to have that equal balance of like being able to have you guys tell me to like essentially to fuck off, while at the same time like having very heartfelt moments. And I knew that all of you guys were very tuned into that. So yeah, I guess what am I aiming at? I suppose with the kind of story I wanted to tell, I wanted people that I really trusted to handle the subject matter with care, because there's a very fine line with Vampire the Masquerade that could really go into some like dark shit. And I knew that basically I knew that all three of you would be extremely respectful about like where borders and lines are, that you guys would be like, still, of course, all three of you are going to be bouncing off the walls with ideas and the such, but I knew that you guys would never take it to a place that was maybe like too far or start accidentally like bouncing over each other's lines. What else can I say here about my great friends? Yeah, like I think it was just one of those things where I just trusted all three of you to like pick up what was being thrown down. Like I knew that all three of you would be able to mesh with pretty much anyone I put on the podcast with you guys. And I knew that all three of you would be like very like kind to any newcomer. So I felt comfortable bringing Brenten in, though the difficulties of being overseas and all that kind of wonderful shit.
Yeah, that's actually something that I'm curious about, because, and don't get me wrong, absolutely loved being on the show. I remember you gave me a shout in, when was it, like May or something, saying like, hey, cool, this is what we've got going on. I remember you sent out like a little form with all of the like the potential games and like what we'd like to play and everything like that. But it would have been so much easier for you to go, because you know you've done your theatre course, you've been playing, you know, role playing games since forever. It would have been a lot easier to go, I'm just going to get one of my mates locally that plays. What made you go, hey, cool, I'm going to talk to this dude that's on the other side of the world, and introduce some of that potential difficulty to like a project that you've not done yourself before?
Well, the answer is quite simple. For the most part, like I suppose you could put it into two categories. The first one is hard, like good role players are hard to find, and the second one is that like it's a little bit of this, but less so, that there's like a whole lot of like live play podcasts that are like world-renowned voice actors who have been paid out of like buckets of like money to be able to perform. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's also important that we get people who maybe don't have a huge theater background or acting background, but who still love playing these games, because I want it to show that like RPGs and live play and playing games with your friends goes beyond your acting resume. It's important to know that gamers are just people who like to play games. That's it. That's the be all, that's the end all. And you shouldn't limit like the creativity and the production of something just because, I don't know, like it just seemed like the right move to make, simply put.
Also, to jump on there, in my experience, and this will continue in, but I find that, at least with my experience running games, mainly Dungeons and Dragons, new players have way crazier ideas because they don't necessarily know the game mechanics that will allow that to work or not work. And they won't always be looking at a stat to decide if that's the best option. They'll do it because that's the option they want to take, which kind of leads me into a question about the World of Darkness. I, for one, was completely unfamiliar with the World of Darkness in terms of lore, in terms of game system, and you had read up quite a bit ahead of time. Were you surprised at all by the directions that any of us took with our characters within this like world that seems quite flooded with lore and specific expectations?
I would say no, but for the best reasons. Because yeah, well I think it's all for the best reason. I think it kind of goes back to what you guys were talking before, like asking about like why was I choosing you guys and why like I wanted you guys specifically to to go into this game specifically. And it goes back to the balance thing where like when I've watched so many Vampire the Masquerade live play games, I'm gonna preface this and say there's 0% wrong with this, but a lot of them I noticed were just very grim. They were very, I suppose, very not nihilistic, but like there's a certain level of pessimism that seems to be like prevalent throughout the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Like leaning really heavily into that. This is because I think in the source book it says this is the dark world. It's a dark place. There are no heroes, and so what you've noticed that they're all leaning very heavily into that. No heroes, no sort of vibe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like the no heroes aspect, which I definitely think is something that is really helpful, that defines the World of Darkness from other systems. But I think that can sometimes shoot itself in the foot, where at least when I was like doing research and looking at all this stuff, like I loved the poignant moments and there were plenty of them, but then there were many times where characters and players would fall into like like they would be asking the same questions and getting the same responses from other players over and over and over again that were just constantly like this very like nihilistic kind of like, oh, like I want to fight against the system. No, you can't. Like, this is just the way that things are. And I really wanted to like explore that to the extent of like, I think that kind of mindset on it. Well, everyone plays their own games. Don't take this with a slice of, thank you. Take this with a grain of salt. But I think how people would have to operate in the world today, in the World of Darkness, would have to change. It would have to update. That's a big reason why I wanted to make Bouchard not just a priest, because there's like a whole bunch of things that are influencing that. And like, essentially I just wanted to try to build something that would break like the usual conventions, to try to go at a slightly different angle, still holding on to bits of the lore and like different aspects of like the genre and the mood and the tone, but I didn't want it to turn into like, I suppose just a spin of nihilism to a certain extent, or just relying entirely on the tropes. And I knew that all three of you would be willing to like just rattle against the chains a bit and start breaking at some of those like concepts and conventions. Like, well, for one thing, like the biggest one, of course, is Asher, like trying to fight against the dominion of vampires and their control and being able to speak to other communities. But also, like, one of my favorite characters throughout the series, and like I think like a lot of my favorite moments have been with Nakano, because Takeshi just brings such like a deep tenderness to such a character who can be so flippant and be someone who has like gone through so much, but there's always this quiet hope that no matter what, like there's always this part of Nakano that has this heart of gold, and regardless of how briefly you look at him, like it's one of those things where like, especially when Nakano began to open up, it was like, you guys are doing the exact thing I was hoping you guys would do, and I knew you guys would do. So I was like,
yeah, like a moral center, like an immovable moral center. Yeah, because I know that like when the Bouchard thing came around, we both slipped into, we've got to do what must be done. When before we'd said, all right, we're going to be good. Whereas Nakano was very much like, no, piss off. We're going to keep this moral center.
So this is something I wanted to talk about because at a certain point in the game, Nakano became this. Oh man, like the Nakano became like this pillar of morality for our group, and yeah, and I know that. I mean, I know that Asher and Talisen had differing levels of comfort with doing what needed to be done. But I remember Takeshi saying how surprised or shocked he was that Nakano was being put in this position of power in terms of morality. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Talk.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually really interesting. Yeah, that you bring up Nakano in relation to what you were talking about, Tyson, about wanting to rattle against the bars sort of nihilism that in some ways are baked into the game. Because when I sort of conceived of Nakano, and we can get into this later when we start touching on like how it created our characters. When I conceived of Nakano, and during the first couple of sessions, I think I was sort of leaning into that nihilism where I'd conceived him as someone who was very shady, someone who was, very bitter and very resentful of those around him who had sort of given up hope. And I don't think it was until episode 4 when we went to Frederick Lake's house and we went into the basement and found the bodies. And it's really interesting because Nakano at that point was under that compulsion of I think it was dominance or feeling like he needed to be in control of a situation, feeling like he was out of control, because I in the moment I was having a lot of trouble like figuring out how to show that without just sort of derailing the whole party and just being sort of an asshole to everyone. And when we'd found the bodies and when we'd seen like this wholesale slaughter, I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. This is an interesting way to bring out that sense of needing to dominate, because this is Nakano realizing that this whole situation is so wildly like out of hand, out of his control, and then me bringing in that sort of backstory, because I kind of cheated with Nakano's backstory in that moment, and I think Tyson, you can attest to this, because in my original backstory for Nakano, his leaving the war that he was in Japan had less to do with sort of a moral compunction about the wholesale slaughter, and originally it was more just him being a huge coward and deserting. And in that moment, I literally, it was just as I was saying the lines, I was like, oh, well, this is really interesting if he actually has like these emotional scars related to wholesale slaughter. That's a nice way to connect the backstory to present. And I just sort of shifted, like that whole thing just sort of shifted his character into this new trajectory. And I think like it developed, not in a bad way, but it developed an expectation from you three that he would follow this trajectory, which ended up being sort of an upwards one, sort of one of him rediscovering hope and rediscovering his humanity. And so that, like, episode 4 is really when I think my grasp of him solidified.
My characters, I tend to be pretty close to me as a person. Do you think that Nakano reflects a part of you or a specific part of you?
I feel so. Like, something I've noticed throughout my many games is that no matter how much I try to make a character who's like an asshole or whatever, I can never follow through. I can't help but make them have some sort of moral center, which I don't know if I have a moral center. I could just be an asshole. That's up to history to decide. But yeah, I definitely think that Nakano has something of me. He is definitely well Nakano's conception. I guess we can get into this now. Nakano's conception was very much me wrestling with ideas of being Japanese Canadian and ideas of immigration. Now I myself am not an immigrant. Many generations of my family have been living here on the Japanese side, but it is something that I sort of symbolically wanted to talk about. There's a long history in arts and literature and in films and all that of looking at monsters like vampires and using them as sort of a representation of the quote unquote other, of some form of marginalization that isn't once human but is not human, is ostracized by society. And I thought, well, this is an interesting thing to try and update into the 21st century. And so you have this figure who was just sort of a guy in Japan, where he comes from, and rather a noble guy. He was a samurai and all that, and then he was turned. I'm gonna part the curtains a little bit and say that he was turned into a Nosferatu on the way over to Canada. And so by the time that he has immigrated to Canada, he's no longer a man here. He's this monster. And that was also why I sort of wanted to make him a cab driver, because it's sort of this cliched image of the immigrant who had a very prestigious career in their home country, and then when they get to Canada or the US or whatever, can only find work as like a cab driver or something like that, which is not a dig against cab drivers at all. I think it's a very noble profession, but it's something that I wanted to sort of play with there and sort of explore, I suppose.
And what about you, Brenten? Do you feel that Talisen reflects a part of yourself? Were you playing within a trope? Where did this classic Toreador persona come from, along with the character that lay underneath?
Well, I was listening to Takeshi talk about the themes of the character, and I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, he's gone really deep with it. He's really thought about the character concept as a whole before portraying that. And usually when I play characters, I like playing the extroverts. So when I play D&D, I play the bards. As a person, I'm a very outgoing person, and I do like to be part of the action from a social and an oratory standpoint. As Tyson can attest to, because myself and Ethan have both been trying to do our monologue and say our piece, and we're both just stepping over each other sometimes. But I love having that tragic backstory to run on, and I like delving into international characters. So I pulled a lot from myself. I guess my objective was that I wanted to do an accent, because when I've played with Tyson in the past, I've usually dropped into Scottish or Irish accents sort of fairly naturally, and I didn't want to do that. So my objective was have this outgoing character, make sure he's got tragedy, do a new accent, and what I pulled from there was, but what we were talking about earlier, where Takeshi's character took a big took a big turn based on events in game. I was almost counting on that to happen. I think Talisen evolved very much so throughout the game, and part of that was due to the fact that I created him as just flat charisma, charm, with a little bit of combat to back him up. But a lot of the conversation starter and a lot of the, I guess, persuasion was done by the logical persuasion of Asher. So I found I was using the charm powers and just overt, slick persuasion less and less, and that was a part of his facade because he had some really deep seated issues, and I wrote him as he's going from place to place as a security measure. But the more I looked upon that, and the more that he couldn't be that slick charm social commander of the group, I actually saw that and I'm like, no, he's running. Like, this isn't I'm doing it to protect myself and have fun and indulge in my ego, which he was, but he was running from what his sire had done to him. And I wanted to embrace that sort of pain and raw emotion that could come with this bombastic, energetic character that was Talisen. And so I know, for example, episode 10, episode 9, so the Bouchard episodes, when he got stabbed in the back, when he had to deal with the mayor and the prospect of turning someone, and he really had to confront that emotion. That was one part that I really enjoyed, and I enjoyed it. Almost relied on the fact that my bare bones concept of Talisen would change based on what happened in the story, and he did, which was great. I had so much fun playing Talisen. Yeah, how about you, Ethan? What's?
Do you see a short librarian man inside of you?
Deeply. So just in terms of, even if we're just talking about in terms of physical appearance, still now, but less. But I grew up very insecure about what I looked like, and how I appeared, and in role-playing games, so often everyone designs their characters as stunningly attractive. And I've done it too. My first character was a tiefling bard. Am I deeply ashamed of it? Only a little bit.
Come on, man. Bards are the best. The best.
Oh no, it's the tiefling bard combo.
Yeah. Look. That was my first character as well. So join the club.
But I definitely think that my familiarity with Montreal influenced the character design. Especially once you brought Point St. Charles in. I spent a lot of time there my last year in the city before leaving. In a very education heavy role. And I often design my characters based off of one of the 5th edition Paladin oaths, without playing Paladin, because I personally feel that playing a character that their power comes from an oath, at some point they're going to break it. Playing a character who has those bonds and that intention still allows them to kind of fail and still continue to grow. Asher started off as a little bit of a Captain America origin story. You know, he was this scrawny average kid. He couldn't enlist in the Second World War because he had asthma, but no such thing as the super soldier serum, so he wound up just writing letters to the government until he could join the Monuments Men, and just wound up being a researcher. And that's when he was turned. And, I'm Jewish. The Holocaust is representative to me as a way that, you can convince, a small group of bad people can convince a large group of ordinary people to do something, even if that something isn't the right thing. And I think that reflected a little bit in the way that Asher's motivations came out in the end. Why are we persecuting these other groups when all we know about them is that they're not like us? And there's more that goes into that, and more detail in his backstory. But Asher didn't have the trauma that the other two had. He got his wish. He wound up helping his country in the war. He saw some stuff that he won't forget, but he doesn't have those immediate scars. And then he was turned and just like continued doing research, but just at night instead, and wound up in Montreal and worked at the archives because it's a windowless building, worked at like an overnight bookshop because it's like a gimmick and there's a huge student body in the city. His life was never really bad, even with like the curse of vampirism. So I think that both places him in a position where he can help other people be raised up out of despair, out of nihilism, but also gives such a fragile framing to walk on that if there is something that snaps, it's a long fall from grace. And I think we saw the possibility of that in his escape.
Tyson, sort of in line with all of us talking about the conceptions of our characters, I'm curious to ask you how you, if there's anything in particular you wanted to say about how you came up with this campaign and what your thoughts going into it were, what sort of your preoccupations and things you might have been hoping for us and the audience to get out of it, not just in terms of Vampire the Masquerade as a game, but in terms of storytelling and any sort of themes and such.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, while I was working on it, I wanted to... Well, I'll start with my process, then I'll come around to the other stuff. When I was creating the process for the game, I wanted to incorporate like a lot of like Montreal's real history into it, because well, that came a bit later. Like I wanted to ingrain it in the city's history, but I also wanted it to reflect how I saw the city, and I'll be very clear here. This is from a Anglophone from Ontario perspective for me moving here during university. This is a very specific perception how I have seen the city. And in a lot of ways, I see it, or at least I tried to make this game a little bit of a love letter to certain areas of the city I've fallen in love with, and like certain aspects of the culture and just everything to do with Montreal. But I also knew when I was designing it, I couldn't give it what someone might be able to say a quote unquote authentic Quebecois perspective. Like it was something that I knew that I would not be able to produce. I just can't do it because of like a whole bunch of things. But I saw a very unique opportunity with it based on what you guys were like pitching for stories, for your own characters, because you were all, to one form or another, having characters who were not originally from Montreal. None of the characters were characters who were like born here, turned here, or had spent like, as far as they were aware, any time in Quebec. Now with that came like its own kind of different looking at like the politics of that and the politics of like other people coming to tell the story about Montreal from their own unique perspective without being Quebecer. But I also think that it's just as valid to show that perspective. Yeah, essentially I was like wrapping my head around all of these different like politics and how to work within the area that I felt comfortable in, but also that I thought that the public would really enjoy, and also that you guys would feel comfortable in, and put simply, not being a dick. So when I was developing it and I was looking at like Quebec history, like I'd learned it a lot in university, as far as things like the Quiet Revolution and the like discussions of like the referendum to like for separation, and the FLQ, and just pretty much just basic Quebec history, and then going deep diving into that for this and figuring out like what points throughout history have been massive touchstones where, like, what were their causes, and being able to kind of interweave that with the world of darkness. So, like, with the Quiet Revolution, of course, La Sombra is no longer going to become as huge of a thing, and then they get their butts kicked by Toreadors and Bruja, who are then able to take over the city. And it's just moments like that, and kind of looking all through those moments to, like, where are we now? Where, when I was thinking about, like, okay, so who's looking after the city now? It doesn't make sense that La Sombra's looking after it anymore. There's a huge student body, and thus a huge, like, protest. There's a heavy, like, protest environment, and people who are, like, willing to go out and fight for the, like, the voice of, whether it be themselves, for the voiceless, whoever it is. And so I saw that, like, prevalently, and I was like, okay, so then maybe Bruja has a larger standing there, and having it more influenced with the school system. And then, like, oh, of course, Montreal is also a massive hub for the arts. We'll definitely need a Toreador influence there. And then I was thinking on, okay, so then what are other aspects? What are, like, other things that would be kind of scattered about? And I wanted to incorporate other groups. And I kind of wanted to have it a little bit with other groups making it like political moves as opposed to what may necessarily be fair, quote unquote. So, like, having a Ventru, I wanted to have that there as not only just having a Ventru in the city, but also having a little bit of a touch on, like, things like external American or Anglo-Canadian influence into finance and marketing, because a lot of people kind of mention that, and how that, like, French, like Quebec, like, small businesses and such are sometimes get pushed out by these other major companies coming from Anglo-centric parts of the world. So having that kind of influence there, kind of having, like, little bits like that I wanted to, like, emphasize that are still there and are still problems that are in need of solutions or need discussing. Like, I wanted to have the smaller things there as well, but also taking into consideration, like, outside of, like, trying to create like a complex weave of what Montreal looks like, also create things that are fun and interesting, like having Keeper Nayla have a secret underground lair filled with books. I just think that's cool. Like, that's just cool to have an old port, like that, like a certain level of whimsy. And kind of talking to, like, mentioning Ethan talking about being, like, working in Point St. Charles, I also wanted to take into consideration things that, like, the actual players have seen or they're actually know about, and wanting to, like, with the purpose of St. Columba House, I just wanted to get them some traction because they do fantastic work. Please check out St. Columba House if you have the opportunity, because they do fantastic work. I've seen it, and there's lots of places around Montreal that do fantastic work that sadly we weren't able to get into the series, but hopefully next season.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Yeah, you really did. I was just when you were saying this part before, and I was thinking about some of the other DMs and storytellers that I've had, and even that one very short time foray that I went into to DMing. I noticed that you're putting a lot of work, not just into the actual preparation of where you're going, or but also the themes that are incorporated into the world, as opposed to just going like, yeah, cool, here's a town, let's have some baddies and, you know, whatever, which is part of what makes you such an engaging storyteller. Is this level of exploration of themes something that you do every time that you DM, or have you gone into special effort this time to really make a story that sort of grabs you, a story in a world rather, that grabs you out and pulls you in?
It depends context to context. For this one, I went deep into, like, trying to look up historical and cultural contexts because look, baseline, my biggest fear was like creating like a very like, how do I put this? Like creating a game where it was strictly about, oh, look at all of these English people and all of these English characters that have dominated the scene in Montreal, and everyone is just English, right? Like it's Canada, you know? So it was very much me trying to play the balancing act of basically just having empathy for a whole lot of things at once and taking those contexts into perspective and making sure that all of those things were being addressed. But as far as like other campaigns I go, like it's probably going to be clear for, well, I don't know if it'll be announced as of this point, but I'll keep it a mystery for the sake of this. For the next campaign we're doing for the Rook and the Rascal, I've had to do a massive deep dive into string theory and experimental physics to understand like the different things there. And there's some deeply fascinating shit there. Like there's some very cool shit, but that's also like part of the joy for me for like world building and like creating concepts is like just going ham on the research and trying to do your best as much as you can within a given amount of time to prepare for a game. Because of course nothing's perfect. Like there's definitely things that like through the production of this season that I want to change and things I know that I need to work on and to get better at, both on the actual like play side, but also like I think more importantly on like the research side and making sure that like things are above board and things are just good to go.
I will say though that from my experience with Tyson as a storyteller, game master, he does an excellent job of making sure that there are stakes that matter to the characters and that matter to the players. And hitting both of those, I find can be difficult, especially balancing level and experience and ability of the characters in game with the level of the threat. I think that Tyson does a good job of balancing those to a point where it's manageable, but always is intimidating to go up against.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because I've played under a few DMs, and like everyone that's done role playing games has done this. You know, whether it's someone who's trying their first time DMing, or you know, you go to a meetup group and find something. Because this is how I've done a lot of my D&Ding. I started playing a lot in places that I didn't know anyone, so I'm like, you know what, stuff it. I'm just gonna go to a group. I'm going to go to a meetup and meet these totally new people, and, you know, and some DMs have been absolutely incredible, like Tyson and like one of my mates in the UK, a Polish guy by the name of Matt. And then some DMs will, for whatever reason, they'll play the game and you just can't get into it. There's just, whether it's the style, whether it's the content, whether it's their mannerisms, but it's just something about it is you get in there and you play the game and you get up and you're like, nothing about that grabbed me. There was nothing, even though you love playing D&D or love playing role-playing games, you get up and you're like, that didn't have that thing, that special thing that I was looking for.
I think that, like, I think put pretty plainly, that thing that you're trying to quantify, I think, is like how much how much control or impact do I as a player and I as a character have on this world? How much choice and like impact do I actually have? And I think that a GM or storyteller that allows you to change what they have planned that loosens the reins enough so that like at 5 a.m. they're planning out a new branch of the arc. That's a good storyteller, not in like World of Darkness terms, just in writing terms. If the characters in the game can't control how the plot could change, then you should just be writing a book. If you want to write all the characters. You were gonna say something, Tak?
I just as a player, I found one of Tyson's absolute strengths is being in that sweet spot where you've got your story and it progresses, and there's always something. There's always that, edge of your seat, fingernails in your mouth moment. But there's also that stuff that can just go boom and absolutely just knock you for six. Or, to speak in a term that's not Australian, that just totally flabbergasts you that you just don't see coming. So I guess in an extension to that, to everyone here, what was a moment that really just you've gone, oh, I didn't see that happening? Whether it was from Tyson, like a plot point that the Tyson introduced, or whether it was a player action. What was something that totally surprised you?
Talk. Were there any character or story moments that were just like jaw dropping for you that came out of left field?
Oh, that's a really good question. Some things I really enjoyed on, I think, just sort of a character level were for both Ethan and Brenten. Whenever you chose to diablerize someone was always a really interesting moment, because it's such kind of a big deal in the game and in the world, and so whenever a player pulls it, obviously it's really cool to like bite another vampire and you get like a big power up or whatever. That both of those were something that I really loved. Actually, as I'm saying that, one thing that just knocked like the shit out of me listening to it was I can never remember what the episodes are after like the first 5, but it was the episode where we finally meet Frederick Lake in the secret apartment up at the top of the building, and that whole episode where Ethan, it was basically like a 2-person play. It was a 2-hander between Tyson and Ethan. Was just such an incredible moment where I think we barely had a roll until the very end, and it was absolutely breathtaking to just see the two of you like role play through this absolutely bonkers situation.
I loved that scene, and I also think that goes into like talking about what place do roles have in a role-playing game. But I really think that when you're playing a character, you don't have to be afraid to beef it, honestly. And like there's this like joke of, oh, well, it's what my character would do. And I definitely didn't mean to take away the spotlight that much that episode. But it was, yeah. It was just, like, there was this huge investment, especially after we found out what happened to his family. That, like, Asher wanted to help this person. And I think that like Tyson's acceptance of like not rolling and just talking through it and letting me get away with some like hijinks in terms of like trying to clear his mind outside of the defined rules of the game, it was huge. And in terms of the Diablerie scene, I was honestly struggling to understand why it was such a huge issue in World. Because from Asher's perspective, regular humans are equals. And he hurts them all the time to survive. And I think I got a little bit lucky in that situation where the previous episode ended with me winding up with the perfectionism compulsion. And I was able to carry that through into the Diablerie. Asher was just younger than Talisen and Nakano and not as powerful. And because of that, he wasn't able to keep up. He wasn't able to protect the people he cared about. And eventually something had to give.
I will say with that episode, I was fully expecting there to be a fight. I did not think that we'd be able to talk Lake down, which, yeah, I guess is a testament both to Ethan, to Tyson, your ability as a DM to let players run with it. That's something that I've noticed in your games, is that if we can talk our way out of something without rolling, you're certainly going to let us try. We might cock it up immensely, but you're going to give us a go. And then hand in hand with that was Ethan's ability to go, all right, I've got this chance. Let's see how much rope I can pull from this. Let's see how far I can go. And as it turns out, we had a character that was immensely powerful that I thought was just going to be a matter of time before he got sick of us and attacked us because we're vampires that killed his family, even though we weren't the vampires that did it, to someone that's like, hey, cool, I'm going to go fight for you.
I think a huge part of that as well is that Tyson created an NPC that was so human and so fleshed out and three-dimensional that I was able to engage in that and figure out where they were coming from, what they might need from me, from themselves. And I mean, that's huge. Like, actually having an understanding of what an NPC is all about when there's dozens that Tyson has to be worried about, to have them all be real people is incredible.
That is the highest compliment you could give me, so I officially retire right here.
No, it's to our listeners, we're doing at least the original part of it over Discord, and when we're doing the boss fight, we're just sitting there watching Tyson go through how many character sheets? It was a character sheet for every single ally that we had, and then every single enemy that we had.
Not every single enemy. All of the ghouls had like a basic stat block.
No. Don't give away your secrets. Don't sell yourself short.
Let me simplify then. There was a part where we're like, okay, hang on, just give me 5 minutes. I need to go collect all the character sheets from every single character that I need to control, use, interact with, and he comes back with this like novella, like hand thickness, like pile of papers for all the characters that he's gone through, and a lot of those characters, apart from just having stat blocks on a sheet, had personalities, had things that made them human, had motivations. That's what I was getting at, is that it was this big stack of papers which would have been, for anyone, challenging to navigate during combat. But then each of those sheets was also a developed character, obviously, apart from the girls. So it's I guess the effort that you've put in and the resulting payoff was incredible, because there was so many main characters, or notable characters, all of which were developed, as opposed to here's a guy, here's one thing that he likes, cool.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I will say for the audience at home, for the love of God, don't use 11 different character sheets to run. Please make yourself a stat block. It's so much easier. For the love of God.
Yeah. We with that final fight scene, I was going in fully expecting to bite it. And what we did beforehand, Tyson was like, okay, cool. So you can have the XP from the end of the session beforehand, so you can properly allocate anything you want. And so we're all sitting here like, oh my god, okay, what do we do? Like, this is going to be incredible. We're facing an army. Like, and we get in, and there's 6 schools, Bouchard and Bray, and I was fully expecting everyone to die. Like, I was fully expecting everyone to be just totally screwed. And we ended up getting into a position where we actually outnumbered the enemies, which I was not expecting at all.
In terms of jaw-dropping moments for me, Asher wasn't in the scene because he had already gone to lead the gangrel away. But when you two stepped into the office and Sebastian was there talking to Bouchard, I was losing it. Here I am. I started the game with this advantage as mage companion. And there's this twist. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. It's been a day or two in game, and it was incredible. And then we lost track of him again. There was no time. And I appreciated being able to maintain my connection with the Magi without him there. But when, like, I didn't know at the time that I was still going to be able to do that. So as soon as Sebastian was in that room, I thought that Bouchard, I thought in that final fight, whenever it was going to happen, we were going to be up against all of these, like, college kids that Asher cared about and valued. And it was incredible. I was losing my mind.
Yeah, I remember that moment, because I remember leading up to that, you know, we had Nakano was, like, dragging Talisen into the building, and full disclosure, I guess to you too, Tyson, I was purposefully trying to make every single one of Nakano's lines of dialogue, like, a final line that Tyson could, like, end the episode on, and then, you know, the person there was just like, oh, okay, why don't you come up in the elevator? And I'm like, okay, I guess we're still going.
Yeah. Yeah, when's this episode end? Fuck. I keep giving such good material. When's it done?
But no, like, and then when we got up there and Sebastian was there, like, all the pieces just fell into place in my head, and I was like, I wouldn't have missed this as the closing to the episode for the world.
Yeah, well, I suppose, like, as far as that final fight went, there was actually more people that could have gotten involved at that final fight, depending on what you guys had done, because there's always the possibility that you didn't go after Frederick Lake and he was going to fight you. There was the opportunity that you guys could be fighting Sunscorch. There was actually an opportunity for you guys that we never got to go to, that Sunscorch might have actually switched to your side.
Oh, dang.
How? Like what plot line would that have been? Because I was sitting here thinking we finished all the side quests. minus the Cairn.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, oh wow, cool. We tied up everything apart from, well, minus the Ken and minus your chickie. What was her name? The Talia. Thank you.
Well, I do remember right near the beginning, Ambrosia telling Nakano to basically get her access to the archives or something along those lines.
Yeah, going back a moment, as far as surprising moments, 0% expected you guys to be able to swindle Ambrosia for a little bit. With that one, like, there's definitely certain moments that turned into, like, side quests that I had not been expecting at all, such as asking Ambrosia what she wants and a plot twist she wants inside of the archives. The two that I do remember that were, like, potential plot points for you guys to hit in order to gain some benefits is, like, for the True Faith, you gained 1 point of health, I believe, if memory serves. If you brought the heart to Saint Joseph's oratory, the heart would immediately lose its vampiric nature, and you all would have gained one humanity. To give the heart, like in real life, Saint Friar Andre's heart, but in the course of the game, Friar Augustine. Was it the second one that I remember was for Sunscorch, where you would go and talk to what was it? It was when you guys got the mayor's phone. You guys noticed that there were 2 different options. One of them was for Francine. The other one was for like an info that the mayor just kept sending locations to. And those were the locations that Sunscorch was essentially just it was just a dead email that they would just get locations, and then they would just go to wherever the information was being provided to. So it was kind of like their drop point. So if you guys had sent up a rendezvous, not knowing what to expect, you guys would have come face to face with Alexandra Capaldi.
She wasn't a fan of us just based on pre-stream alone.
No. It definitely would have started as like a semi-hostile like standoff. And she like off the start hated you guys, but there was a possibility that you would be able to reveal that Bouchard was also a vampire, and that like the deception ran deeper than she expected. So for that, she would be willing to side with you guys in the temporary before leaving entirely to essentially with her crew and like essentially saying, thanks for the info this time, but if I see you guys again, you're dead.
Yeah, I don't think Asher would have gone for that.
Talisen probably wouldn't either, given the fact that both of us have that, that we end up becoming part of the leadership council of Montreal, both for our own different reasons. I think that would have devolved into, he's dead. If I see you again, I'm going to kill you. All right then. Well, I guess you'll be seeing us again. I think that would have very quickly devolved into another fight.
I also think that Asher would have been uncomfortable providing Sunscorch with information about his other allies or providing them access. Although having humans or Inquisition in that council would have been a get.
I mean, from what I know of the Inquisition, and look, we have some pretty persuasive fucking powers behind us, so but from what I know of the Inquisition, they're looking for a vampireless world is like their end game. But like, so going, hey, cool, we're gonna rule the city peacefully with you guys, not gonna kill you or your buddies at all, like forever. I just don't see that being a part of at all the Inquisition's aims and like core objectives of the organization.
I mean, I see it similar as like creating that relationship with the Guru, like convincing a group that we are not all monsters, to know one of us is not to know all of us.
One last moment that just caught me absolutely flat-footed. It was not necessarily when, in the very end, we discovered that Estelle could cure vampirism. It was very much the moment when she straight up offered it to Nakano that just absolutely caught me like a deer in the headlights. And I think that was really obvious when I literally stopped the narrative flow to just have a drink with Asher and Talisen, and it sort of just became me, Takeshi, asking Ethan and Brenten, hey, should I do this?
And yeah, I mean, for me and for Asher, it was just like that scene. I mean, that scene also got, I didn't know what you were thinking. I thought you were going to do it. And then I thought you were going to do it. And then I thought that one of the many enemies we made was instantly going to kill you. I was I was prepared for my entire epilogue to be like setting up ways to defend this like fragile mortal dude.
Yeah, this yeah. I mean, for myself and Taliesin, there was very much like, I don't want it to happen because that would mean that we can't play further with Nakano, who such a sick character.
It would just be mortal stats. Also could set up like a different thing, like if you wanted to be suddenly like trained as an Inquisition. I know that there's a companion book coming up in the future.
But then as Taliesin, which I try to separate Brenten and character when I'm role playing, which doesn't always work, admittedly. But I had Talisen's distinct thoughts going, I don't want to lose my friend. Because for everyone out, actually, a question after this is about our session zeros, but he didn't want to lose someone that he'd been in like from a selfish reason. He didn't want to lose one of his friends that he'd been in contact with for probably 100 years at this point. But he also knew that it would bring him peace, and that it may well be one of the best things for his friend. And yeah, so it was very much, he wasn't saying something either way. He tried to say, you can do both for these reasons, because yeah, he was both had selfish and selfless reasons for the answers that he gave. But I love that scene because it reminded me of, you know, the scene in Avengers: Age of Ultron, where they're all just drinking. No, they're all just drinking and trying to lift the hammer and just being friendly, and not these story-driven heroes that you actually get to see a more human side of them. I really like that scene because we got to have let's have a drink, let's have a catch-up, let's just be friends for once, as opposed to having these huge, you know, world-changing moments dropped on us for, you know, 20 episodes straight. We just got to see them enjoying each other's company.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to touch on that moment, Takeshi, when Estelle asked, because I had not been preparing that ahead of time. It was only after you guys had developed with Estelle like the idea for the video, and there was just a series of scenes where Nakano had shown like a profound kindness, or like a profound just a sense of goodness that seemed to emanate off him, that really caught Estelle's attention, that I knew that it was going to be more of a selfish ask on her part. Like this momentary, like, not moment of weakness per se, but just as you guys got to know each other, and I was thinking about like who your characters are and how exactly would they interact. And of course, I do not think that anyone needs to have a romance in any kind of RPG session. It's all entirely to their like taste and their comfort. But there was definitely some things that I was like, oh, that's very interesting for Estelle's perspective, because she could potentially start seeing this and offer that this is like a little bit of a grapevine, in the sense of like, oh, is this person ready if they do want assistance when they become mortal again? Like, because she didn't also fully understand like what it meant to be a vampire or a kindred, but also having kind of like like a very like ultimately childish impulse, though not necessarily a bad one, but like that little hope that's kind of like, oh, well, I'll offer this. This is just me just offering like an olive branch, but you know, like, it'd be kind of cool if you did.
I actually, one more jaw-dropping moment. The clan curses for Toreador and Tremere didn't really come into play. Asher never tried to blood bond someone. The Toreador one is more.
It's a bit more abstract because it just says we suffer in the absence of beauty. It doesn't. I don't think it gives a specific. You suffer X dice rolls or something like that. If you're not around beautiful stuff or anything like that. But it was still, when we got the clan bane of like, it's like you don't have your clan bane anymore. It was still like, oh, holy shit, we don't have our weakness anymore. And because what Ethan had said that our weaknesses didn't really turn up mechanically, I tried to use that as more of an opportunity to roleplay the psychological changes of suffering in the absence of beauty, I guess. But yeah, still a very big like, oh my god, we don't have a weakness anymore.
And I guess to respond to what you were talking about, Tyson, about sort of Estelle's motivations, I had not planned on Nakano having any sort of romance in the game, really, and throughout the game I occasionally thought about, oh, who might he have like any sort of romantic attachment to? Briefly, I think I toyed with the idea of like a romantic attachment to what's her name, Wash, the guru, just because I felt it would be interesting to have between like this werewolf who very much like a werewolf and a vampire who are both like very much sort of blunt to the point people, and who both sort of hate vampires in their own way. But yeah, I think I was getting the same sort of sense as you, Tyson, between Nakano and Estelle near the end, where I think for Nakano, Estelle sort of represented this better way forward for him and for people in general, where it was not where the choices were not either like suffering or becoming like this like blood-soaked tyrant, that there was this way to help people without having to like be an executioner. And I think just as that sense sort of developed, and also like because I had conceived of Nakano as being sort of an older guy, just being around like a woman who is also like a little bit older than I think most of the characters, like relatively speaking. I understand we're talking about vampires who have been alive for hundreds of years, but like symbolically speaking, just being around like an older, like maybe close to middle-aged woman, I don't know, it just sort of got me thinking, and I didn't want to necessarily like go into a hard left turn of like, and Nakano's dating now, which is why I tried to keep any signs of that sort of subtle in the end. But yeah,
so I do, if I can jump in there, I think age and power dynamics are hugely important to talk about when playing this game system in particular.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Which is perhaps another reason why I hesitated to really dive into a romance there with Estelle. Just because, yeah, like, he is 200. He is like fucking 200 years old, and he is gonna outlive her. So I suppose that is an impediment to a romance in that regard.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I do think there definitely needs to be, like, in the discussion of kind of like age power dynamic within the context of the game, because like I said before, Vampire the Masquerade really plays the line with like certain aspects, especially like romance with mortals, or like really just the baseline concept of consent. like having offers of like different feeding types that are intentionally either like aggressive, do it when like when someone is unconscious, or doing it against their will. Like all of that kind of stuff like is very like thin line throughout this game.
I mean, even talking about how Kindred look for mortals to turn, that's a lot like grooming. There are a lot of issues that I think, if you approach responsibly and consciously, you're able to like play the game in a very meaningful and interesting way that is respectful of players' boundaries and just like your social responsibility and interacting with those issues carefully. I think because of the nature of the game system, there's a much higher risk for it to devolve and to like hurt people.
Yep. Yeah, you do have to be very careful with the line you tread in this game. Because power dynamics are just a huge thing. You establish a feudal system in this vampire society. Like there's people kept in bondage based on addiction. Like there are some very serious implications. So if you do decide to play it, you do have to be very aware of these things.
I just wanted to throw it out there in case, maybe one of our listeners came across us having not played the game system before and wants to get into it. I would just advise you to take a minute to like think about what some of these are, like allegorically, and just be sensitive to any trauma or issues your players might have going into it.
I will just quickly say that entire concept is also another big reason why I chose the three of you for this, because one thing I definitely wanted to look at was like the major power imbalances in the entire lore of the world, and I really wanted to create a villain who was really tapping into that. And I also knew that all three of you were going to fight against it and make something beyond just what has already been established, like really shake up the system. And I'm beyond happy with where it's gotten us.
That definitely feels that a collective fist bump should be had, because like where all of our characters were just almost without being purposefully designed with that end goal or to fight that villain. Yeah, that's a big, like all of our characters have a big problem with that sort of thing, which it fell into place very nicely.
And now it's time to dive into some of the questions that you guys had for us here at the podcast.
One of the questions was, does Nakano have hair? But I'm pretty sure that's that's answered in the next episode.
Yeah. Well. Just to clarify, as a Nosferatu, I have established that he has a little bit of thinning white hair on his head.
I know a lot of these questions as well are just sort of short ones. I don't think they're going to inspire a massive 25-minute thing, so I'll just run through a couple of them. Tyson, how did you get so good at the sound effects, like the door creak that you do, and it just always sounds exactly bang on?
Oh, that just comes from DMing for a long time and being very lonely when you just start making up sounds and voices to entertain yourself.
It's true. Tyson is an incredibly lonely person, especially since I've left Montreal.
How did the trio first meet, and what was our first interaction? Which I think that goes back to was it the 1970s Session Zero?
No, that was just you and me, Talisen, Brenten. For the audience, we had a couple of like session zeros before the stream started. I'd say about 3 in total, I think. But like we weren't always all there for all of them.
Yes, and Asher wasn't there until the third of those.
And so we weren't all there. Some people played different characters. It was a big aim to sort of solidify, do we actually want to play this clan, like, feeding type, whatever character configuration, and also to get our head around the gaming system. But what was the third one that we did?
Was rescuing Ryan and Tyler.
Oh, that's right, it was. Yeah.
That's where we first encountered Ryan and Tyler, and the third teenager that we did not get to in time.
That's right. I remember that. That was good. Takeshi, how does Nakano put up with Talisen?
Poorly.
Especially because, I mean, we were both in the 1920s Session Zero, weren't we?
Yeah. Both Nakano and Talisen were there.
So they've known each other for 100 years. How have you put up with Talisen for 100 years?
Well, fortunately for Nakano, there are usually several decades between those encounters when he does not have to deal with Talisen. But I certainly think that over the course of the campaign, you can see Nakano, as he understands more of Talisen, becoming more tolerant of his presence.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. No, Talisen is a volatile but also tortured individual. So he sort of hides in a bit of frivolity. And as well, as part of Talisen's backstory, is that he'll travel from place to place. So yeah, he's in Montreal for a bit, and then he'll disappear to Europe to steal art from the Nazis, or go to Eastern Europe and become a synth music producer, and then head to the UK to become a punk rocker. So there'll be bits and pieces where he'll come in and they'll interact, and then Talisen will piss off again. All right, if everyone were playing their characters and they weren't the clan that they were, what would the next clan be, and what impact would that have on the characters, if any?
Pick a good one. No pressure.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting question, because I found a lot of us, our clan is tied very closely to who they are as a person, which is why that's such a fun question to change things up a little.
Like I think the answer to that for Asher is the Banu Hakim. I mean, lore-wise, the two clans don't get along, and the Banu Hakim think that the Tremere stole the secrets to blood sorcery from them. But in Montreal by Night, like Keeper Nayla is the closest thing that Asher has to clan, and I think that he's like Tremere by accident almost, but he's a researcher by heart, like at heart, and there's several groups that fits into, but I think anything that would allow him to continue researching, he doesn't want presence. I think that wouldn't be a tool that he would rely on very much. Asher constantly thinks that if someone doesn't agree with the way he wants things, then either that he thinks he just didn't explain it well enough. I think he struggles to see that anything about his vision might be wrong. So maybe I'm not super familiar with all the clans, but potentially Bruja or Ventru. And I think that would turn him a little bit more intense.
I think that the funny answer would be for Nakano, Toreador. That's the joke answer. The real answer, I think, at least something that would be narratively interesting, would probably be something like I also don't really know the clans super in depth, but something like Gangrel or Bruja, one of the more combat-oriented clans, just because a big part of Nakano's character is sort of being unhappy with and feeling burdened by his vampirism, explicitly placing him in a clan that favors combat, that favors violence and bloodshed would, I think, tie into to his central arc very nicely as well.
For Talisen, it could go either way based on two opposite sides of the spectrum. He could either go Ventru, which would definitely play on that sort of I like nice things, and that sort of center of the spotlight, ego driven, which is and end up ruling. Or on the absolute flip side of the coin, in sort of touching with his not like rage against the captors and that really sort of that raw emotional individual underneath that sort of classy, charming outer shell. Either Bruja or Gangrel. Probably more Bruja, because that would be the fight against the captors, which is something that was very deep into his past.
I have a few NPCs in mind that I think I would know what they would switch to. I think Frederick Lake could have been an interesting Ventru if he had gotten the opportunity. I think Keeper Nayla, easy answer, the same as Asher, just switch to Tremere. Ryan. Okay, so I can't remember what I was gonna say for Ryan. What I'll end off with is Bouchard. I think under different circumstances for who he was, Bouchard would have made quite a powerful Bruja.
I thought you were gonna say Tremere, honestly. That conversation when Asher was tied to the chair and they were just talking religion.
The reason I say Bruja is that his interest in the occult, in like the readings, like going back and forth with the scripture, had less to do with a interest in knowledge and had more to do with an endless zeal. Essentially devoting his attention to one thing, this thing that he was so sure was going to fix things. Like, he was so devoted to this idea and he got wrapped up in it. And I could see that being focused in Bruja and getting caught into a different kind of zeal and different kind of like willing to go these huge like different directions under different circumstances.
And that's going to do it for us, folks. Thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate your time and your time being spent on this so much. Tyson, do you have anything to plug?
Well, I'll get the quote unquote necessary ones out of the way. Make sure to get all of your board game news from the Bag of Loot. Catch more episodes of this, and for our next season of The Rook and the Rascal coming up, get all of that kind of fun stuff at thebagofloot.com, or check us out at threekingsloot.com for all your board game needs, and check us out on Three Kings Loot on YouTube, yada yada yada. I do want to give a shout out to Hannah for both the questions but also the beautiful artwork. I cannot suggest enough that you check out her Twitter page. We will link it down in the description, so that way you'll be able to check it out directly. But yeah, no, it's just fantastic artwork. She's going places.
Brenten, anything to plug?
Once again, guys, get your vaccines. We've been a little bit slow with ours in Oz because of some supply issues, but I've got my appointment booked next weekend, so In terms of plugs and thanks to Claudia for being a conscious and unconscious inspiration for the character. Also, thanks to Assassin's Creed because I borrowed some of the Ezio accent from that, and also some of the Italian swear words / phrases. Thanks to Hannah for doing all the art, and thanks to you guys for being such awesome cast members and going on this journey together.
My dearest Takeshi, anything to plug?
I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this, but I am still going to plug October Jones and Fish with Legs. It is a fun, family-friendly fantasy podcast that both I and Tyson act in. It is also an award-winning podcast, having won the award for, I believe it is Outstanding Kids and Family Podcast from the Canadian Podcasting Awards. As of the recording of this, and so definitely by the time that this episode airs, we have just produced a crossover episode for International Podcast Month with another very cool fantasy podcast called Side Questing. Our crossover episode is called, I believe it is called The Lock Pet Monster, and you can definitely find it on Player FM under International Podcast Month 2021. It should be coming out on October and Fish's podcast feed soon, if my information is correct, as well as most likely Side Questing's feed as well, but I really don't know about that one. At this point, we're getting into territory I know nothing about, but definitely check all of those things out. October Jones and Fish with Legs, Side Questing, and International Podcast Month. It will definitely be worth your while.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Go step out into the sun. Go for a walk. Eat something that is or was green. And take some time for yourself. You are worth it.